Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting at the City of Georgetown City Council. We're going to start on our workshop agenda. I've got everyone on the dais with me this afternoon. And first up, we have got Kimberly. You're standing right there. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just prepared. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm excited to be here this afternoon to present you an update on the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. A short 8 months ago, back in March, you approved a contract with Green Play to update our Parks Master Plan and also do a cost recovery plan and policy. So while Green Play is the lead consultant on the project, they have several sub-consultants that are helping assist with planning efforts. Covey Planning and Landscape Architecture here in Georgetown is one of their sub-consultants, as well as BRS Architecture and RRC Associates. So in addition to the Parks and Recreation staff that's been part of the project team, I also want to let you know that we have 2 Parks Board members that have been serving on our project team, as Catherine Kiner, who is our chair, and Chad Holtz, who is our vice chair. They've been on the team since the very beginning. So the presentation today will be handled by Dan Cedar and Dave Peterson, and they're with Green Play, and also Josh Donaldson, who is with Covey Planning and Landscape Architecture. So at this time, I would like to hand off the presentation to Dan Cedar. He's our project manager, and he's with Green Play.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for allowing us the opportunity to present the draft of the master plan. Got a few slides we'll go through just to lay out the process. The one thing I want to let you know is this is a draft for content only, so if you have that master plan in front of you, I believe it's close to 100 pages long. As you read through that, please note that it will be formatted. It's going to look pretty and everything when we get to the final stages, but right now we're really looking at the content and what we have there for you. The agenda for today is really to just kind of recap the project schedule and what we've done, what the master plan process was about. We'll then go over some of the key findings, some key issues, and then what the next steps of this process will be. So this is our project schedule. Like Kim had mentioned, we actually started back in April with our SKO, our strategic kickoff, and then really got the project rolling in May. We are now in November with the public meeting for the draft presentation that we're at. We also went through this process yesterday with the Park Board. The next step after tonight will then be putting the draft in front of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department for their review, and then the plan is to be back out in January to present the final plan. So the master planning process, this is just a recap of what we did. So we had our strategic kickoff back in April via Zoom with the city project team. And during that meeting, we really laid out what the vision of this plan would look like, talked about the critical success factors, laid out the schedule for this process. We also created the project website. And if any of you right now want to get your smartphone out, you can take a picture of that and it'll take you right to the project website. But we started out the community questionnaire on that website just to get the project rolling, just to get some feedback from residents before we started our stakeholder engagement sessions. And we've used that website just to keep updated with our findings and just the process we've been going through. Next slide's looking at our community input summary. So this is just a summary of what we did with our engagement sessions. So BRS actually started back on May 3rd, where they came to town and met with the staff and did an indoor recreation analysis. They went through your indoor facility, sat down with staff and did a thorough analysis with them. We then started our engagement sessions May 12th, and those extended through May 24th, so over a 2-week period. I see some familiar faces where I did some one-on-one interviews with some of you. We also engaged staff through focus group sessions, as well as some stakeholders and citizens from the community. All of that information was then presented at an open public meeting on May 24th, and then that information was passed on to RRC to develop the community-wide survey that I hope all of you were able to take part in, and that survey went out in 2 parts. There was an open link and a random sample, and that took place from June to July. We then were back out here in August 25th, for our findings presentation in this room, doing an open public meeting, presenting the finding of all the analysis that went through this process, not just the survey, but also Dave Peterson's outdoor level of service analysis, BRS's indoor service analysis, and other analysis work that we had found at that time. We also had some key issues we identified at that time and worked through what we call a key issues envisioning session with the staff project team. Next couple slides are just kind of a recap of the survey. I'm not going through the entire survey process, but this is just a reminder of really how many people took part in that survey and what the survey looked like. So we had over 2,000 surveys completed, of which 491 were the invitation sample. Those were the mailed out random sample surveys. And then 1,545 open link surveys that were completed. The open links, anybody in the community could go online and fill out that survey. This next slide shows you the demographics and really a breakdown of the parkland dedication zones. So we did ask people where they lived based on parkland dedication zones, just to see how the results came in. We were able to break these down a little bit more. So we got that community-wide response, and then for a lot of the questions, we were able to drill down based on where people lived and what they were saying based on those parkland dedication zones. You can see that Zone 2, a majority of the surveys were filled out from that zone, 39%, 29% from Zone 1, and then you can see how the others laid out. And the overall is on the left-hand side, the invite sample in blue and the open link, and those stayed pretty consistent. And overall, the survey, the invite and open link samples were consistent throughout the entire survey. A couple of outliers were identified, and I'll go through those with the key findings. So a couple of slides here with key findings. The first one on your left are the importance of facilities and services. So on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the most important, households rated the following facilities, how important they are to their home. And the top 3 that came out were amenities at parks, trails and pathways, and then parks and open space. And like we've said with the staff and in most of our meetings, trails and pathways, we're finding that in almost every master plan we work on. That's typically one of the higher responses we see, is people want connections, they want connectivity, they want to be able to be connected not just to their neighborhood parks, but to those regional parks and just overall within the city. Most important programs and services that scored, and you can see these scores here were lower than when you look at those facilities. Those facilities were in the 4 rankings. A lot of the program and services range from that 3.4 down to maybe the high, like 2.8 range, but the top 3 were fitness programs, adult recreation programs, and then senior programs. And then on the right-hand side, we asked how well your facilities and services are meeting the needs of the community. So how well are these meeting your needs? And we saw here that trails and pathways, amenities at parks, youth athletics, and those senior programs scored pretty high in terms of meeting the needs of the community right now. Skateboard parks and environmental programs are rated lower for the invite and open link respondents, as you can see at 3.2 and 3.1, and those were our lower rankings. So again, lots of your rankings were above a 3, which is good, and that goes back to the importance as well. We saw a lot of good scores coming in with your system. On the left-hand side, this next question is asking, so if we did something, what would increase the use of the parks and the facilities? So what would increase your use as a household? Improved communication about what is being offered, better lighting and better maintenance. And as I said to staff, every single survey we do, no matter what, people always say, improving communication. No matter how well, and I will tell you that your staff and department does a great job with communicating. We've been working with them. They're innovative. And no matter what, we still hear people say, oh, I didn't hear about this, or I didn't always know this is being offered. So it's just staying on top of that communication and on how people receive their communication. And we did drill down with the survey, and we do have responses showing how people prefer to be having that information sent out to them. The open link also showed better lighting and then having facilities closer to where they live. So that was kind of the outlier there from the sample. Having facilities closer to people, and we're starting to see that more as well. People want programming closer to their homes, so going out to those neighborhood parks and having more options. Transportation, we did ask just to see how people get around, and motor vehicle rated the highest as people's preferred method of transportation. We do ask this question just to see, do people walk to your parks? Do they bicycle? But mostly people are using the car, jumping in the car to go for their recreation services. And then we had some funding sourcing questions. The first one that you see is there was 73% support for more private public partnerships to increase funding opportunities. So again, that's just going in and finding other partners that you can work with and looking at different opportunities to increase funding or increase the delivery of programs. And we did ask about a bond referendum for special projects. And we did see that there was 59% positive support for special project bond referendum on the survey. And then the last slide is asking future facility needs. So on the left-hand side, what are the most important items to focus on for facilities and amenities in the future? And here we saw adding trails again and pathways and that connectivity scoring the highest, acquiring land for new parks in underserved areas, and better maintenance. And again, better maintenance. Your parks are maintained pretty well. Dave will get into that a little bit, but that's something that's kind of consistent with a lot of master plans we see is just maintaining that level of service and that standard that you have throughout your entire system. And then the right-hand side are future program needs. So what would you like to see in the future for programs and services being offered? And here we saw more after-school and summer programs kind of ranked the highest there. And then we also received more fitness, wellness, and health programming opportunities. And that's pretty consistent with what we're seeing in a lot of communities now is kind of that community health aspect that Parks and Recreation plays a role in your city in promoting healthy lifestyles and just having programs in place and opportunities in place for people to participate. And then we talked about future indoor recreation center. What would be most important in a new indoor recreation center? And the top two amenities that came through there were fitness areas with weights and cardio equipment and group exercise rooms. So I'll turn the time over to Dave to go over the outdoor.
Good afternoon. So I came to town back in end of May and went and visited all your parks. So I do that kind of across the country, travel around and visit parks for a living. We created a GIS map here. This shows all of Georgetown's parks, a few of the county parks, and some alternative providers. I'm also noting some Sun City up at the north end there. The green spots are basically parks, and somebody made a comment last night about how large Gary Park was there. So it just in scale, you see the large green spot out there at Gary Park. Some of the central parks are a little bit smaller and harder to see on this map. One of the things we do is make some comparisons to you. NRPA, the National Recreation and Parks Association, puts out some annual metrics. And these aren't necessarily standards, but they're just available for comparison. Shows you a little bit how you may compare to other similar-sized communities across the country, where you're a little bit higher, where you're a little bit lower than those communities, where you are in park acres per 1,000 people, those types of things. Again, nothing really kind of startling here. What we really are concerned about, though, is really comparing Georgetown to itself. So looking at your neighborhood parks, deciding if certain parts of town have gaps in them. So there's people that don't have access to parks. And we heard Dan say that in the survey, we heard that the people are really driving to parks. But there's a big national movement now for this 10-minute walk. And who has access to park within 10 minutes? And so this analysis using GIS really looks at that access to parks based on a 10-minute walk. So the purple areas are areas where people kind of meet that target level. So we set a standard or a goal for everybody to have access to at least a park with 3 components. So a component would be something like a picnic shelter, a playground, a piece of open turf, maybe a loop walk. So imagine going to a local neighborhood park and having 3 different things to do in that park. We also heard the importance of regional trail access and people's ability.
I'm sorry, can you define what a park is again, please? What is it? 3 items, 2 items? Is it a piece of just green space? What is defined as a park? Because some people think X is a park, and we will say, well, no, that's just open space.
That's a good point. We're really looking at those things that are available in a park, and so we're ranking parks based on the number of different things to to do at a park. And you're right, some parks only have a piece of open turf, and we saw several examples of that in Georgetown, where there's only a piece of open turf where you may go throw the Frisbee. Other parks, like San Gabriel Park, have a ton of different things to do. And so this scaling, this evaluation of parks really looks at all of those different things to do in those parks. And this map really gives us an idea of where people have access to enough stuff and where they maybe don't have access to enough stuff. And so again, kind of back to your question, the more things there are to do in a park, the higher the park scores in our level of service analysis. Thanks for that question. In this map, we can look at the actual demographics of those purple, yellow, and gray areas. Again, purple, people live with access to, say, enough stuff, if you will. People that live in a yellow area may only have access to that park that has a piece of open turf. Maybe they just have access to that regional trail, but it's not adding up to maybe enough stuff, if you will, enough things to do. And people that live in a gray area have to get in their car and drive further than a 10-minute walk to get to a park with enough things going on. So 23% of the population lives in a purple area, 32% lives in a yellow area. So over 50% of the population have access to something within walking distance of their house. But 47%, again, have to get in their car and drive. And that's probably not surprising to you all, and even to the survey respondents, that people are having to drive to parks. So as we get into recommendations, you'll see that a lot of our recommendations revolve around making these trail connections, adding new trails, and adding parks or improving parks in some of these areas that are yellow. Again, so as we move beyond this analysis, identifying these gaps, our recommendations are really revolving around making improvements to things that you already have or making connections to trails in places where they really need to be done.
For exactness, that adds up to 102%. Is there something we missed?
It's rounding.
Okay.
Rounding.
All right.
Again, we did a lot of different analysis. These were just kind of the higher level examples. Any other questions on the level of service analysis before I pass this off back to Dan? Yeah.
All right, the indoor recreation findings. This BRS, again, was our indoor recreation consultants on this phase of the project. And I'm just going to go over kind of their top findings. This first slide just tells you a little bit about just the city and what people have access to. So most of your residents live currently within a 10-minute drive of your recreation center. If that's extended out to a 15-minute drive, it reaches the southern areas of the city as well as some communities beyond, except for a small part of Sun City. And then overall, their findings do show that there's data that indicates a strong market exists to support the existing indoor recreation facility and likely future indoor recreation offerings. So this next slide is just showing that 10-minute drive, and it's shaded on the outside. So what they're trying to do here is show you your 10-minute drive boundary with your current population in 2021 of 59,427, knowing that you're going to have a projected population of 69,000 that will live in this 10-minute drive area. So by 2025, we're expecting that population to be around 69,000. So you have a growing population that you all are aware of. If we extend that boundary to 15 minutes, that increases that population size to about 179,000 current year with a projection of over 200,000, 206,000 residents. So this just gives you an idea of what that growth is going to look like, how many people live within that 10 to 15-minute drive of your current facility that is now serving 59,000 people. And then as we look at those population projections going up over the next few years, what that demand is going to be. So BRS found, currently they went through the current facility and did an assessment. And what they found with the interior and the exterior is, your facility has aged. It's aged well, but it's showing its age. So it's in average condition for the envelope of the building, and it's in average condition for the interior. It's where it should be in terms of how old it is and the use. The assessment of intended use, your space and size configuration functions do limit some of the desired use or purpose for your adult fitness, your child watch, and your gymnasium spaces. They're just not large enough for the demand, and we know they're not going to be large enough for that future demand that's going to be coming down the road. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment, again, that goes back to you've got, just the age of the facility, so some of that, your fixtures and your furnishings are just showing that age, and they're probably at the time where they need to be renovated and replaced. Wayfinding can be upgraded. And then the lobby, we have some security and control access is limited due to the orientation of that front desk and the way it's situated. When you look at space and size configurations, does not permit desired use or purpose. The technology is lacking in the fitness areas. Potential e-sport programs, sound system is inadequate. Staff and support space, there's not a lot of office space. We got that lack of space there. Storage is always an issue at the indoor facilities, so you're lacking in that area. You've got that 2-entry system, which also isn't the best system in terms of inefficient use and just being labor intensive. So we've got some areas there with the senior space, bus drop-off, and the parking are inadequate. So overall, what BRS found, and this is a straight-up summary of kind of what we just talked about, is there's a strong market. We know there's a strong market for indoor recreation in Georgetown. We know you have a growing population, and you're going to have a demand that's going to increase on that facility. You have a current existing facility that's in working condition. It's good for its age and its purpose, but it's not going to meet what this demand is coming down the road. It is a candidate for renovation and expansion. We also know that we need to look at a future facility down the road and where that facility will be, and that's where some of these recommendations are coming in from BRS. And then we also brought in the public support in terms of looking at the gymnasium amenities being important, the fitness area with weights, cardio equipment, group exercise rooms, those types of things. So there is that looking at that best practice and that next step of what a new facility might look like and where it would go. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into our actual draft recommendations. So the next slides are talking about what those key issues are. So as I mentioned, when we came out for the findings, we identified key issues and started to work through some preliminary recommendations with our staff. And what we found is 5 really categories that we came up for the key issues: organizational effectiveness, level of service outdoor, level of service indoor recreation, looking at your programming, and then looking at your financials. With the project team, we worked through some preliminary recommendations when we were here for findings. We then went back and developed our draft of our early recommendations right now. So I'm not going to go through every single recommendation. I know you have this in front of you, but I want to show you what the recommendations look like, and I'll talk through a few of these. So down at the bottom of the table, Goal 1, organizational effectiveness, so that's the category for this area. We then define an objective, which is Objective 1.1, improve communication with residents, and then we have action items listed below that. So here we're showing action item 1.1A and 1.1B. We also will identify if there's any capital cost estimates that go into any of these recommendations. We'll identify if there's a budget impact. And then we base the time frame to complete. You'll see short term is your 0 to 3 years. Midterm are those 4 to 6 year time range. And then long term is a 7 to 10 year time range. If we say it's ongoing, that's something that's more or less a yearly evaluation, making sure that each year, we're looking at our program evaluation sheets for our programming, or we're looking at our recreation software, just making sure things are updated and we're staying on top of everything. We also might show underneath ongoing or underneath short-term, it might say priority in bold. We try to find 5 to 10 short-term goals that we know are priorities that we need to jump on right now. And in fact, we've already started working on some of those short-term priorities that have come through Dave's level of service analysis and through the work that Covey's been doing. So communication with residents, we've identified just staying on top of how people receive their communication, making sure that we are adapting to the way people communicate, and just making sure we're always updating it. Duplication of services, what we talk about there is looking at, sometimes there's 3 or 4 of us doing the same type of programs or the same type of services. And so it's really reevaluating, should we be doing this? Is there a better way to do this? Is there an opportunity for us to partner with someone? And maybe we provide the facility or the space and they provide the programming. Is that a better opportunity for us? And then the reach of services to the public for our programs. We did find, and I'll show it later on in a slide, that Zone 4 identified that they would like more youth programming, and they would like that youth programming coming to them and taking the programming to the parks and to the people. And we're starting to see that more with just throughout the nation with a lot of our master plans is people would like to see more programming in their neighborhood parks. They would like to see the programming come to them and not getting in my car. Oops, sorry. I talk with my hands a lot. And driving somewhere to take part in that programming. So we'll have some recommendations that focus on those areas. Key issues for level of service and indoor, quite a few here listed. Obviously the trails and pathways, skate park, safety in your trails and parks, desire for community gardens, aquatics and water opportunities, additional parks and open space and improving that walkability, looking at just the internal standards for our parks and our components, and then implementation of a standardized park system, classification system. And I'll turn the time over to Covey to talk a little bit more about the trails.
So as part of this process, we were asked to undertake an update to the Trails Master Plan. When we started that process, we kind of had a two-part approach, identifying corridors that meet that long-term need, working with the city to identify that routing and making sure it will serve the most people efficiently in the near term. But then the second part of that was to kind of differentiate between the types of facilities that exist. We structured that different function based off of information that's kind of laid forth by the U.S. Department of Transportation, the Federal Highways Administration, where they look at different types of facilities for specifically smaller communities and rural communities, which right now it kind of still fits with what Temple is, or not Temple, excuse me, what Georgetown is in its infant. So first part is we have the side path. When you look at the old Parks Master Plan, it identifies trails as a whole, but it doesn't differentiate between trails that are located within the street right-of-way versus something that's located within a river corridor like the San Gabriel River Trail system. And so what we did as far as trying to simplify the implementation of the trails system is to separate those two facility types out. So a side path, again, is a trail that you would find that's in close proximity to the road or part of that right-of-way system. Whereas a shared use path is one of those that's located off-street, separate from that environment, typically associated with something like a creek corridor or even a utility easement. And you can see that they're kind of a different environment and specifically more of a different implementer. Stuff that's found within the street right away may be done by the transportation department, whereas stuff that's truly more of a park facility, kind of that recreation component that really feels like it, that has that environment, is something that's going to be more the focus of the Parks Department. And so in these two types of facilities, we did not just work with the Parks Department, but we also reached out to the planning and the transportation to get their input on this approach and this routing. And from there, we also looked at the two other components of kind of a trail system, not just the trail facilities themselves, but also that beginning, that point of origin concept. One of those being trailheads, where specifically one of the issues that was addressed earlier was safety and concerns with the trail interaction. And so we talk about the programming elements of the trailhead experience, where you have things like a kiosk that can help orient you to the routing and safety precautions you may need to make, as well as things like bike repair stations or other sorts of facilities like petway stations or portable restrooms. And then we also call out the opportunity to see the inclusion of things like lighting at these facilities, specifically making sure that there's a visibility component with that off-street parking element, as well as emergency call boxes if it calls for it. And so this is one type of destination access point to a trail, where then you also have the other type of access point, which is more like a neighborhood connection. And we felt like bringing the juxtaposition of these two types of access points and comparing them to each other was important, because one is something that you can encourage developers to do just, as they're submitting their review process, making sure we're going out and identifying opportunities to see that subdivision connect to an existing trail system, but make sure it's done in the right context where we're not providing trailheads within existing neighborhoods, where that, we have the trailhead that I previously showed, which would be something that may be associated with a larger park system. And that was just more as part of that trail system. It's not just trails, but it's how you access it. And we want to make sure that this planning effort kind of started to outline those differentiations. Go back to...
Real quick, Amanda's got a question for you.
Question about the trails, and this may be a you question or a Kimberly question. Oh, sorry. So I know that on our agenda for meeting tonight, we have on consent the agreement with the Georgetown Trail Foundation. Were they a part of this trail discussion?
They were one of the stakeholder groups that we identified, but they were building natural surface trails.
Okay, I just wanted to know if they were at all.
Yeah, they were a part of the stakeholder groups that were identified and interviewed back in May.
Okay.
And so we worked with them through the process.
Okay, that's all I needed. Thank you.
All right, the next round of recommendations really deal with level of service indoor. And there's really two key issues that came to light here, and they were the pretty obvious ones, is there's the need to renovate the current recreation center, and then the lack of the current space that must be addressed with the demand that's going to be growing here for your population and addressing that. So really the biggest recommendation that's called out there is the next step is looking at a feasibility study on the renovation of your current facility, looking at a new facility and what that would embark on and what that would be. A master plan is, and I didn't say this at the start, but it's that 30,000-foot view of your system. We don't dive in and specifically say you must build a recreation center at this place and it must look like this. The next step of the process that we call out is you need to look at a feasibility study, bring in some people to look at what is the best fit for you, what is going to be the best thing that's going to work for your community, what is that best renovation going to look like for the current facility, and then what is that next facility going to look like, where is it going to be, and what's it going to be made up of. Going through a lot of the same process we just did, community engagement, hearing from people and what they would like to see, and just understanding what's out there. So those are the big recommendations that have been called out for your indoor recreation center. For programming, not a lot of negative things with programming. It's just expanding and how to better deliver the programming to the public. So here we did hear through community engagement as well as the survey, people are looking to see more environmental, educational, enrichment programming. That's a pretty consistent theme as well that we see in a lot of our communities now. So that connection, and whether that's you providing that service in specific parks, whether that's somebody else providing that service in your parks, it's how can we deliver and how can we grow programming in those areas. The need for more after school and summer programs, that's always something we're seeing, and again on surveys and through community engagement, is having opportunities for those kids after school. Is it the city's responsibility to deliver that programming? Is it the schools? Is it a combination of the two? Is it another agency as well that does it? So providing the space and the structure and those types of programs. And then here again, as I mentioned, through the survey and through some of our community engagement, we had a couple of people in our focus groups bring up that Parkland Dedication Zone 4 area, bringing some youth opportunities and more youth programming into that area. And what was specifically said from I remember with our focus groups is people wanted to see that programming coming to them and finding some places where they can deliver that programming in that zone area in 4. And then the last one, financial, is we know your community is growing. And as you grow, you're going to possibly have more parks, you may have a new facility, and it's maintaining that level of standard as you grow and having a plan in place so that you keep that consistency, that high level of service with your parks, that high level of service from your department and your staff. So we did do a lot of benchmarking, and I obviously didn't go into that great detail. We could be here for 4 or 5 hours going through all of that, but it's in the plan. We looked at NRPA benchmarking, comparing you with other agencies your size throughout the United States. We also identified 5 to 6 cities locally that we benchmarked against. And we looked at, department budgets, dollars spent per resident, all that type of information. And so we've got some recommendations in here that just address that, adding full-time employees as you grow over the next 5 years. We did do a financial analysis, and I'll be talking about a cost recovery next. Teresa Jackson, who's a member of our team, she's working with me as a project consultant on this, and then she's overseeing the cost recovery. She did a financial analysis and looking at your details, looking that you may need to add approximately $1.5 million in the next 5 years just to maintain that current level of service in your department as you grow. So we've got some recommendations in there with the financial aspect. Next couple of slides are just going to be an update of the cost recovery. The cost recovery is separate from the master plan, but we have it going on, coinciding together. I'm actually not working directly on the cost recovery. Teresa Jackson is, but just wanted to give you an update on where they're at and what the process of the cost recovery is. So I've got some notes I'm going to go through. The cost recovery, just the pyramid methodology in general. One of our owners, Chris Strapinski, Greenplay has been around for 21 years now. She was the director for the city of Boulder up in Colorado, and she developed this pyramid methodology, which really looks at putting our programs and our services on a tier of what benefits the community the most to what is considered an individualized benefit. So that bottom tier, that's kind of your foundation. That's, I pay my taxes, I expect this from my taxes. I expect a park, I expect a trail to walk on. Just those basic things that, as a taxpayer, what I expect from the department. The individualized goes up to, and we go through a whole series, and it's not the same in every community, but it might be me buying a hot dog at a concession stand. I buy that hot dog, I eat that hot dog. I'm the only one benefiting from eating that hot dog. Pretty simple, but that's kind of how you make that comparison. And then we've got a bunch of different layers there on what's a considerable community benefit, what's a considerable individual benefit, and we go through and we actually do an exercise that I'll talk about to put these in different categories. So your department, your staff, as well as we went into the community and had some focus groups, but we came up with program categories to represent your department. And again, this is structured specifically for you. It's different from any other city we do cost recovery on. These are samples of your service categories. You have 37 total categories. This is just a small sample. They started out with 42, but what they did is they took all your services and programs, defined a service category, came up with the definition, and then you can see some of the examples of those programs that fall into those service categories. And I'm not going to read through every single one of them, but you can look at those. And so that was kind of the first part of this whole process, was to go through that. Then they did a sorting exercise where they really it gets you to really talk about what you offer. It's a methodology that helps you really discuss internally with the public as well as with your staff on, what is important, what you're doing, what is the best that'll work for you in the community. And just really what it does is it engages discussion on a swim lesson. And where that swim lesson falls in terms of how well that benefits the community, how well that benefits an individual. Looking at maybe some of the special events you do and where they fall. And so some people might say, hey, I think it's down here is a 2, it benefits the community. Other people might say, no, it's more of a specialized thing, it goes up here. So it just brings people with different viewpoints to start to really discuss about your categories, your programs, and start to sort those and create an ownership and just really understand the types of services you provide and where they fall in line. And you had 3 workshops that were conducted over 2 days, October 11th through the 12th. One was at the Parks and Recreation Administration office, one at the Public Library, and one at Public Safety. There were 32 community members that participated with over 48 hours of basically volunteers getting together and talking and sorting all these different programs and different categories. It's done through a facilitated discussion. These are just some of the pictures that take place. Usually we grab, we might have 30 people in the room, and then we put you in groups of 4 or 5 at a table. Hopefully you're not all the same-minded folks, and then you talk about these programs and you start to layer them and get them going. And I wasn't involved in this process, but I know your staff has lots of great stories that they'll share with you going through this process and facilitating some of this discussion. And then they came up with really where these program categories fall on your pyramid. So this is the staff and public pyramid from that workshop, and where these different categories fell in line. Again, there's 37 on here. I won't read all of them. But you can see down at that mostly community benefit, what program categories fell in line there, all the way up to that mostly individual benefit. And this is still an ongoing process with this cost recovery. The next step is to really determine what the current cost of service is. Then we'll start to establish cost recovery goals. So each of these tiers will then be assigned a cost recovery goal for each of those tiers. And again, it's different in every community. But you will assign what we basically think we should be subsidizing down at the bottom up to, is this something we shouldn't be subsidizing? And it might, and I'm not going to throw numbers out or try to say anything because, again, it's going to fit your community the best. That'll then go to approval and then an implementation and evaluation once it's approved and taken on by the city. So those are the next steps with that cost recovery. The next steps of the master plan, this just shows you our 4 stages of engagement. We're at number 3 right now with the draft recommendations. So again, we're here presenting the draft, trying to get feedback and input. It'll then go to the Texas Parks and Wildlife for their review. Make sure we're meeting their standards. If they give us any feedback on some things we need to adjust, we will definitely do that. We then will be back in January to look at presenting the final plan, looking to do that with the Parks Advisory Board, and then coming in front of City Council to present the final plan, and then adoption and implementation in the end of January into February. Any questions? I know it's a lot of information, and I tried kind of higher level of view there.
Let me give everybody a chance to weigh in and provide some feedback. I'll start. Am I right? Amanda, you want to?
Thank you for the presentation. So just a couple questions, just for clarification. I didn't want to interrupt you in the middle of the program, but on the rec center renovation. So what I heard you say is that you think that you're making the recommendation that the rec center needs to be evaluated, but that you won't be doing that evaluation through this process. That would be a separate process?
So this process calls out that you do need to renovate it. Mm-hmm. So that next step is that feasibility study and budgeting for that, and then having a group come in and really dive into what that renovation will look like.
Okay. And does that also take into consideration looking at whether one rec center is still sufficient for the city of Georgetown, or whether we would need to look at multiple facilities in different locations throughout the city?
They've determined that the one you have now isn't going to meet the demand that's going to be here. So the recommendation in there is to look at adding another one.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I believe it's in 3.2 of the action items.
Yeah, just wanted to make sure that the clarification is that we're not going to make that determination now. You're just determining that we need to do something to accommodate the future rec center. Okay. And then just a couple comments. So one thing I hear a lot is, especially in our neighborhood pocket parks, is really the need for pavilions, seating, and specifically covered seating, because we live in a warm climate a lot of the year. And as I've looked in, my part of the district, I think that is something that's needed. So I think addressing that, is essential. And then love the idea of, I hear a lot about more programming in our neighborhood, pocket parks. And so I love hearing those type things with community gardens and all of that. So otherwise, it seems very comprehensive. I think we'll dive into it and move forward from here. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm going back up to the top. I was looking at the original portions where you broke out levels of service outdoor, and one of the items that you listed there was skate parks, but then in the prior presentation it seemed like skate parks rated a little bit lower. Was I missing something there?
Was it on this
Yeah.
slide, if I back up? So sorry, which?
At the very beginning, we were, yeah. So,
Oh, okay. Let me back up. So all the way back to the very front. Right here?
yeah.
Okay. So again, your question, sorry.
So I'm looking at this slide at the beginning of the presentation and seeing how we rated different things. Then the slide you were just at, we have a great in-depth list. But for me as a councilman, it'd be helpful to see how do those things rate compared to this.
Yeah. So I know in the survey we did have, I believe, broken down a little bit more detail on some of the amenities in parks. I'd have to pull up that survey report that we can dive in. This is kind of that high level of the findings. I'd have to pull up that survey to look at it a little deeper for you.
Okay. I was just curious when we start looking at that list of desire more trails and pathways, that was consistent with the first slide you showed. Then the second thing that jumps up is access to more skate parks, but that seemed lower, down in the 3s compared to in the 4s. Then parks and safety trail, safety. So I was just seeing how on that list of key issues, levels of service for outdoor, how those things were in pecking order. Are they just in list format?
That's just a list. Yeah, sorry, and I probably should have said that. Those were in no particular order.
Okay.
That list of all of them. Yeah, so sorry. I know Trails and Pathways got put at the top, and that seemed like the most, but that was not in a particular order.
Okay.
And I think the distinction here is that skateboards are low in meeting the needs.
Gotcha.
So trails and pathways were very important, but they were also meeting the needs very high. Skate parks are not currently meeting the needs. That low score means that they're not meeting the needs.
Gotcha. So therefore, we need to be looking into that.
So therefore, we need to look at improving our current skate park or adding a skate park. I think
Thank you.
is the distinction.
Well, I would just add, if you look at the draft, if you were to actually go into the draft master plan and get towards the end where you actually see the implementation, you'll see one of the items being consider updating the existing skate park and looking at that and from a time frame, looking at that as a short time frame, not a long time frame. So that's how those would then be connected.
Yeah, and
through the
those
master
will be
plan.
ranked more priority as well. So when we get into those recommendations, when you get into here, we will have those listed short-term to long-term. They might be jumbled up right now, but that will be updated to reflect because, again, this is still in draft and these might change. But so the slides don't look at the slide as the priorities.
No relevant order then. It's just I was picking at it and saying, how does this work? But
if I just add on, if you look at the master plan attachment on page 99 is when you start seeing, or 98, excuse me, is when you start seeing recommendations and action plan, and then you'll see here they provided a high level during the PowerPoint because we didn't want to provide you a 99 slide PowerPoint presentation, but you'll see here a more detail in terms of the action steps. And again, these are draft formats, so much more work to do. They're just kind of giving you a snapshot in time of where we are, and then we would bring back a more definitive action plan as we move forward to the next.
And
briefing.
we'll still work through some of the wording in there. If we need to make it more direct, we will. So as you see it now, there's a good chance some of that will change in terms of the way it's worded. And again, it's just like you said, it's in the draft.
Were there any major changes in the way of either deletions or additions from the previous master plan, which was done in 2008, I think, 10?
Is that right? Yeah.
Do you recall any major deviations from this one, from that one? Anything that was added? Obviously, we've made progress, I'm sure, from 2008 to today. But were there any major additions or deletions that you recall? Like obviously the West, I see in here the West Side Rec Center was recommended in that one, and it's still recommended in this one, for example. Was there anything like that was taken out of this one that was included in the previous?
We didn't pull anything directly from the previous plan.
Did not use that kind of as your starting point?
We looked at it, but we went into this as this is where you are on this date and where we want to see you going.
Got it.
Because even with this plan, and I hate to say it, but 5 years from now, it might not be the state of the economy, or things can change. And so that's why we really, when we do master plans, we say we can look out about 5 years and have a really good idea. When we get to the 6, 7+ years, things can definitely change, and the environment can change, which could affect some of these goals and recommendations. So Yeah, we did look at what was previously in place, but we didn't pull directly any previous recommendations or anything like that.
Okay. And on the, I believe you said there's a bond referendum question. Would there be support of a single issue bond referendum? I believe you said 59% responsiveness were positive of that. Is that from all levels of survey, all levels of feedback that we solicited? Is that where that figure is calculated from?
Yeah, that was scored on a scale of 1 to 5. So those numbers are showing the people, I believe, that scored 3 and higher that would support the bond. Your 4s and 5s were very strong support. We don't ask that in every survey. I want to let you know that. We asked that here because we wanted to do that with this survey. But that was based on the survey respondents. So the random sample and the open link, again, the numbers matched up almost exactly. I don't have the survey in front of me, but there were not many outliers at all in that. And we even broke it down by the parkland dedication zones. And we can, if you look at the results, you can dig down and kind of see based on where people live, how much they supported. Yeah. It was strong support, that 59% basically across the board.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was a lot of work. Obviously, the question is expanding and or versus a new and separate. I'd like to add another one that is a separate one. I knew one large one, which probably would not be in the same location, given that the town is growing in a different direction. So if we had one large one, it probably would not be where it is now. Mm-hmm. And would there be any possibility of working with GISD and maybe turn that land and the facility over to GISD and let them do the renovation?
You know what? We don't dive that deep into it. That could be part of what that next step is with your feasibility study.
They have already expressed with this last bond issue that they need 2 or 3 things done. And it would just seem to me that there's a natural opportunity to at least have that conversation and say, can we take the renovation of our parks and our recreation center and work with them as a part of renovation, expansion, et cetera. At least have the conversation and see if there's a way to do that. Clearly, we need another facility. The question would be, is it a great big facility? Is it a second facility or whatever? But I would certainly include them in the conversation and see if there's anything to be had there.
Yeah, and again, that just goes with kind of what that 30,000-foot view of we know there's a need, and that next step is how best to address it.
When you're moving from 30,000 to changing the altimeter and dropping below 18,000, have that conversation. Okay.
I guess I don't have really anything to add that hasn't already been spoken about, but I think it's going to come down to what the costs are for each individual program, what the liabilities are going to be. And I don't think we can, we're far away from that point right now, aren't we?
I think so. I think there's two paths working. One is finalizing some recommendations and setting a priority list in terms of the implementation plan for council to take a look at. And one of those discussions is, movement of facility and indoor recreation versus commitment to outdoor recreation or outdoor amenities, and continuation of our trail master plan and the weighting of those things. And then the second thing to look at and work on is the cost of service model, or cost recovery model, excuse me, and us to continue through that process with you all. So this is just an update. We've got much more discussion to come in terms of that. And then that allows you to say, how should these be subsidized, if at all, these different services? And that gives us the methodology then we use to charge for services. So that includes recreation center memberships, to tennis center memberships, to entry level or entry into Gary Park, to the pricing of like fitness and aerobics and things of that nature in the recreation center.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. As I look at the overview of what this is, 2 things come to mind in just feeling recent experience within the bond programs that were just submitted across, is as we move forward, we have to be very specific. If we say new rec center, it's a rec center within a 2-mile radius of here. It maybe doesn't have to be exact, but we need, because support waivers as depending on where it is, because everyone says we want the asset if it's close to me. And then if it's not close to me, then they don't really care as much whether it gets done or not. So we're looking at and improving the current rec center and rehabilitating that. That seems to be a sound idea. There's usage there. Do we need a second rec center? At some point, I think, based on the city growth, we do, and then it just becomes where is the next place. But the funding for all these different projects, I think, could get contentious because everyone wants something closer to them. And we talked about the 10-minute drive. I would challenge, if that 10-minute drive for those areas, it must have been done at 2 a.m. when there was no one out there, because just getting up and down Williams Drive can take you 20 minutes just to drive that street. So the idea that someone, let's say living in my district in La Contera, to drive to the current rec center, that could easily be 15 or 20 minutes depending on what part of the day they try to drive it there. So I do believe that amenities should be within that 10-minute drive and then maybe an extended up to 15. But we have to be realistic when people are trying to get to places. It's not going to be at 10 o'clock at night mostly. It's going to be in the middle of the day. And as we continue to grow from south side to north side or east to west, those things really expand out. And we have to keep that into consideration, at least in my view, because that's what the future is going to tell us, where all the growth is happening, how people are going to have to move, what's currently there. But we do have to rank these because this is all, it's a financial commitment across the board. And it may be to get kind of like 2 or 3 done in the next 5 years because we can do them, and then reevaluate and say, okay, what has changed, what's important has changed, and then try to do the next set, but not to try to bite too much on because things continually change and we know it's going to happen that way. We get all involved in a feasibility study on all these 5 things and we never get to them because financially we can't. So I think ranking the importance of these items is something that we need to do based on citizen input, based on what we can do, and then go from there, take the top 2 or 3 that we can financially fit in a budget that we could ask for the bonding for. Because nothing to me is worse than going through all this trouble and putting out a bond and having the citizens say, well, that's too much money. We don't want to do that. So I want a high probability of success by picking the right things moving forward. So that's really my suggestion. I think all of it is valid. It's when and how much we can get done in the short term. How much is it going to cost? And what greater good is it serving? If X facility put in X place really services 15,000 people versus the one that's going to service maybe 7,000 people, we make that decision. Are we going to service more people in one spot, even though the other one may have just as great a need? We can't do all of it. So trying to affect the greatest number of people. Thank you.
Thank y'all very much. Really appreciate all the hard work you guys put into this and look forward to the next step. But
Thank you.
anything else you need from us, Kim or Dan? Awesome. Okay. Thank y'all very much. Okay, next, I believe, is Eric going to handle this?
Yes, Eric Johnson.
Eric Johnson, come on up, sir. Come on down.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council.